the beginning of the sixth chapter, Pirkei. Some had done it yesterday, and some, because with Tisha B'Av, Shabbos Chazon, they didn't have Pirkei Avos, so this coming week is the sixth chapter. So at the beginning of the sixth Pirkei chapter, Rameir says, "Kol osek b'Torah lishma zoch lidvarim harbei." One who studies Torah, engages in Torah lishma, for the sake of Torah, he will merit many things. He's not clear. He could articulate and tell us what exactly you merit. But Rameir himself says, Dvarim harbe, many good things, many things. Just to give you some background, Rameir, the Gemara tells us in Eruvin that Rameir, there's a question, what actually was his name? Was his name Rav Nechemia? That was his name. However, he was referred to as Meir, because he illuminated the eyes of the Chachomim in definitive law. He had such a capacity and such a dimension of greatness that he was able to illuminate and to elucidate every question there was. He was able to actually give them clarity on everything. So the word Meir comes from the word Or. He illuminated everything, elucidated everything. There was another name, which is an Aramaic name. He was known as Rav Nehuroi. In Hebrew, in Aramaic, Nehura is light. Again, Shayaman here, whether the word is Meir is Hebrew, Nehuroi is Aramaic. So the Gemara explains, but yet, whenever there's an argument, Rameir or anyone else, we don't rule like Rameir. Why don't we rule like Rameir? If there's an argument, because Rameir had such an ability that whatever position he took, whatever side of the argument, he was so convincing that you couldn't disagree with him. So at the end of the day, you weren't able to understand, as much as he could elucidate every aspect of the side of the argument, the question is, but how do you resolve it? As a result of that, the Gemara tells us we don't rule like Rameir, and we rule like those who disagree with Rameir. Although very often you can't show why the other person is not correct, nevertheless, we rule like one of the positions. I'll give you an example. Whenever there's an argument between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, the house of Shammai and Beis Hillel, and the house of Hillel, we always rule like the house of Hillel, except for 6 cases. And initially, there was a baskol, there was a heavenly voice that came out and said, we rule like Beis Hillel. What? So the commentators ask, if the Torah says, whenever there's a question, you're not able to resolve it, Torah says you'll go always after majority. Beis Hillel were more numerous than the house of Shammai. So why did we need a baskol, a heavenly voice, to resolve this issue, to say that we go after Beis Hillel? Torah says whenever there's a question which cannot be resolved, acharab lahatos, you always follow the majority. Now, why did Beis Shammai not agree with Beis Hillel, although they were the majority? So the Gemara explains, because they were charifi tvei, they had greater minds. They had such keen minds, and they were more advanced. I'll give you an example. Havdil, Elef Havdolos. Einstein, he takes on a position in physics. You have a high school boy takes on a position in physics. And you have 1,000 high school boys who disagree with Einstein. The numbers mean nothing, because Einstein is a different dimension of understanding than all these high school children, as good as they are in physics. Lahavdil, Shammai, you would think that because they were intellectually more astute and they had greater minds, maybe it's something similar to that. They're not within the same classification. So therefore, the issue of following majority should not apply. The Baskol came to confirm, no, reality is they are within the same classification. And because they are within the same classification, therefore we follow Beis Hillel because they are the majority. That's the understanding. So we rule in every situation, in every argument in Shas, in the Talmud, always like Beis Hillel, not like Beis Shammai, except for 6 cases. The 6 cases which are the exception. But always after that, Rameir, whenever he argues, we always rule like majority of cases, like the one who disagrees with Reb Meir, or the position which is contrary to Reb Meir. Because we have to have the ability to understand why Reb Meir is more right or less right. So the position who takes on the opposing position, they feel their position is more right, although they can't prove it, but they know it. The example I'll give you, Lahavdil. Again, it's not an exact example. The Gemara tells us that Shlomo Melech, who was the wisest man who ever lived, he married Bas Paro, the daughter of Paro. She converted, he married her. But he did not marry her until his Rebbe passed away. He didn't marry her. And after his Rebbe passed away, he married her. It wasn't really the right thing to marry her, because the question is, what exactly was the quality of the conversion? It wasn't the right thing. But he married her, he had to wait till his Rebbe to pass away. So I asked the question, Shlomo being the wisest man who ever lived, he could have shown and proven to his Rebbe that his position and his decision was the right decision. And his Rebbe could not poke any holes in his position. Shlomo Melech is the wisest man who ever lived. As I mentioned the Chazal, that if you take all the Jews and put them on one side, all the Torah sages, put them on one side of the scale, and Shlomo on the other side of the scale, his genius was greater than all of them combined. So as great as his Rebbe was, his Rebbe could not in any way refute Rebbe said it's wrong. So you could convince yourself, nobody could refute me, no agree with me because I could prove it, in the nth degree that I'm right. But deep down, if he knows his Rebbe disagrees, feels it's inappropriate, it's inappropriate. Therefore, he had to wait till his Rebbe passed away. Only then did he marry Bas Paro. So the same thing, although Reb Meir was able to take on any position, to be so conclusive and irrefutable, but the one who disagreed felt it wasn't the right thing. Reb Meir was incorrect. As a result of this, we rule like the opposing position, not like Reb Meir. I'll give you an example, which is in recent Jewish history. Chazon Ish Zecher Tzaddik Livrocha was the leading Torah sage in his time. Passed away in, I think it was 1953, and he lived in Bnei Brak. And at the beginning of the founding of the state of Israel, Ben Gurion was the prime minister. And there was a question about conscripting yeshiva students into the Israeli army. And the Chazon Ish felt there has to be an exemption. Because without a class of Torah people studying Torah, without that merit, you cannot have a state of Israel. So Ben Gurion himself was a person who did not believe in God. Did not believe in God, Ben Gurion. And himself, he was a person, he believed, which means he may have believed in God, but in terms of, as within the Jewish context, what it is and what's not, he felt, right is might is right, and that's where it begins, that's where it ends, okay? So you heard that the Chazon Ish, this little Jew who lived, aged Jew who lived in Bnei Brak, which were sand dunes, he himself, he's the issue why the religious community are opposed to it. And if he's able to convince the Chazon Ish that his position is right, then he has it made. It's a shoo-in. All the observant Jews will be agreeable to be conscripted, to be drafted. So Ben Gurion was an expert in Tanakh. Tanakh he knew. That's where it began, that's where it ended. And he held that because he's such an expert in Tanakh, Torah, Nevi'im, Ksuvim, the Bible, the prophets, and scripture, he knows more than most people. That's what he held. He's a very pompous person, very pompous. And he's going to convince this Jew, who's this Talmudist who lives in Bnei Brak, his position is right. So first, I mentioned the story in the past. He sends his secretary to set up the meeting, and he goes to Bnei Brak, and there's this little hut, a house, and he knocks on the door. The door's open, not locked. And he comes in and he says, I represent Ben-Gurion, David Ben-Gurion, Prime Minister of Israel. He would like to set up a time where he could come meet you. So the Chazon Ish says, every Jew is welcome in my house, including the Prime Minister of Israel. When he heard this, he was seething. You should be ecstatic. The Prime Minister is coming to visit you. And you're not impressed. He's telling me every Jew is welcome to come to your house. He comes back, he's livid. And he says to Ben-Gurion, do you hear the audacity, the brazenness of this Jew, this religious Jew? He equates you to any Jew. Every Jew's welcome to come through the door of his house. He says, just to the contrary, that's the Jew I respect. He's not impressed with anyone, regardless of who you are. Ben-Gurion took it the other way. I'm impressed with the man. There's nothing to be upset about. He goes to Bnei Brak and tries to convince the Chazon Ish that his position's correct. And he can't convince the Chazon Ish. Whatever he brings his proofs, the Chazon Ish knew Tanakh a lot better than he knew it. And he couldn't, but there was a stalemate. So he says to the Chazon Ish, so what is your position? Why do you feel you're so right? More right than I am. So he opened his shirt and he says, and he points to his heart, he says, because my heart tells me so. In terms of the way I understand it, it's my heart tells me this is what it is. And my heart, which is imbued with Torah, that is my position. And that's it. Whatever he would say wasn't convincing to Ben-Gurion. What is it? I know it's right. That is the right thing, and doing differently is wrong. So Reb Meir, although he was overly convincing, and you couldn't poke holes in his position, because whatever position he took on, you couldn't disagree with him, but one position is more right than the other. As a result of that, we don't rule like Reb Meir, and we rule like the opposing position. But in this, what Reb Meir says here, in this chapter, this statement, nobody disagrees with Reb Meir. So therefore, everybody embraces Reb Meir's position. Reb Meir says, a person who engages in Torah lishma, for the sake of Torah, he merits dvarim harbe, multiple things, many things. Not only that, God says, for that one individual is worthwhile to create this whole universe. Could you imagine? A person who engages in Torah for the sake of Torah, he merits many things, and it doesn't describe what they are. So the Rav Chaim Volozhin explains, why doesn't it articulate what they are? The answer is, it's beyond our grasp. As we say, that reward for mitzvah cannot be given in this world because it goes beyond the finite. Identically, the one who studies Torah Lishma, you cannot articulate or delineate what exactly are those good things, those many things. As we had earlier in Pirkei Avos, the Mishnah tells us, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who was the prince of Israel, he had five students, and he identifies the special quality and characteristic of each one of them. And then he comes to one of them, he just says, Ashrei Yoladato. Fortunate are the parents who bore him, who brought him into existence. I mean, if you're identifying every other one, this one's a chosid, this one is mine, it was Gaber, this is Borsich and Abetipo. Each one, he explains what they were, the special capacity. One of them, he says, Asher Yoladato. Fortunate are the parents who brought him to existence. Why? The answer is, whatever you would say about him, there's nothing to say. You can't describe it. That's how exceptionally special he was in every area of his being. So what could you say? Fortunate are the parents who brought him into existence. That's all you could say. That was his dimension of greatness. Zochle dvarim harbe. You study Torah Lishma, the dimension of the value, you merit multiple things. What are they? Multiple. That's all we could say. Multiple. It's like, we read in the Torah that during the time of plenty, Yosef was the viceroy of Egypt because he had given the approach and the solution, how to save the country when the famine comes, how to store away the grain, and how he appointed people, overseers, and how there was a level of accountability. And, he didn't have a degree in accounting. He'd work till 3 a.m, for the firm that paid him under 6 figures. He didn't work for that kind of firm, Yosef Atzadik. And but it says when he gathered the grain, it was to appoint a mispar. There was no number. The amount of grain was gathered. There was no number that existed to identify the amount of grain that was gathered. A mispar. We're holding by the debt. The United States, the debt we're holding. There may be a number. We have to create a new number to get to that number in terms of what we're holding. So lahavdil, Rameir says zochel dvarim harbe. You merit. It's something which is unfathomable. Delineate some of it. Whatever I say, it's not saying enough. No, there's an expression in English. No, the tip of the iceberg. Tip of the iceberg. This is beyond the tip of the iceberg. It's so infinitesimal in terms of whatever it is. Zochel dvarim harbe. That's how Rav Chaim Volozhin explains. If you study Torah Lishma, and proof of the pudding is, if a person goes and builds a skyscraper, which is about 1,000 stories, which doesn't exist such a skyscraper, and it has amenities and it has technology which nobody's seen. You don't? Now the question is, it must be something. This must be created for something which we're not aware of yet. It's yet to come. Because otherwise, why should you build such a building with the amenities and the sophistication? Why? The answer is, we haven't yet figured it out what the intent of the architect and the developer was to build such a thing. God creates a universe. This universe is unfathomable. The genius in one cell is beyond genius. Multiply it infinite times over. All the aspects of creation, the terrestrial, the celestial, the spiritual, the physical. What's its purpose? What's its value? You know what its value is? For that one Jew who studies Torah Lishma, it was worthwhile for that one individual. That's what it says. Kol olam kula kadayu lo. The whole world was worthwhile for this one person to create such a world. Does that make sense? Person invests beyond trillions of dollars to create a residence for a person. They say, well, it doesn't make any sense. Something less than that wouldn't be sufficient to accommodate him. But if you understood the value of the person, which you don't, that's why you don't understand it. If God creates a universe, oceans, all kinds of species, endless species, and with a balance, with a genius, which a genius is multiplied infinite times over. I always say it over. When they first sent up the Hubble telescope and the first pictures that came back from space, 2 million miles of space dust. You know what that is? We can't even fathom what 1 million miles are. It may have been 1 million, space dust. And we went beyond that. So what is the universe? We don't understand why the universe, why the galaxies have to be to that degree. And why you need so many stars and so many galaxies. Why? Only God knows. But he says, whatever it is, for this one individual who studies Torah Lishma, it's all worthwhile for him. So if that's worthwhile for him, so what is the value of studying Torah Lishma? Studying Torah for the sake of Torah. We're supposed to figure it out. It's like I always say, many years ago, I was in Israel. This particular time, it was Tisha B'Av night. And they hadn't yet opened the tunnels by the Kotel. And I was together with Rabbi Pinto and with Ira Rennett and a few other people. Jay Schottenstein from Columbus, and Jay Schottenstein had a brother-in-law. And we were about to go into the tunnel tour. And his brother says to me, Rabbi, I want to ask you a question. I said, we're about to go into the tunnel. There's really not enough time. Whatever question you ask me, there's not time to ask. But I said, ask the question. He says to me, I'm a pretty smart guy. You realize I went to Wharton. I'm a pretty smart guy. And some reason when I study Torah, it somehow doesn't resonate with me. And I'm a pretty smart guy. And I don't really get it. And, and I run a big business. And he keeps getting back. And, I have a graduate degree from Wharton. I'm a pretty smart guy. So I said to him, there's no time, but I'll try to answer your question with a question, which I'm going to ask you. One question. I said, you ever hear of Maimonides? He was one of the greatest physicians who ever lived. And nobody questions this. And yet, you know what his claim to fame was? He was an observant Jew who codified the Torah. And he got it. So if Maimonides got it, and he was a pretty smart guy, so the question is, why don't you get it? That's my question to you. I said, after Tisha B'Av, we'll continue the conversation. That was my response to him. Pretty smart guy. You understand? If for a mayor, who's a person, any position he takes on, nobody can disagree with him because he's able to elucidate it, and you can't poke holes, and there's no fallacy in his logic. And he says the whole world is worthwhile for this one individual. You want to study Torah Lishma. He's Zochel Torah Harbe. You can't even describe what those things are. If the whole world is worthwhile for that individual, could you describe what exactly the value of that is? It's unfathomable. But I'm a pretty smart rabbi. I don't get it. I'm a pretty smart guy. You understand? You mean you want to understand the divine mind? The word peon, the word is mosquito brain. The word is, there's no word to describe of what you're not. And you want to understand God, the divine. You know where it comes from? You missed the boat. It's like the person who's illiterate says to Einstein, your theory is foolishness, it's nonsense. Where the man can't add two numbers. And the man barely could say an intelligible sentence out of his mouth. And you're telling Einstein that his theory of relativity is a bunch of nonsense. Understand? Rabbi, but I don't get it. You know how much money I have in the bank? Therefore what? God could pull the plug on you in a moment with all the money in the bank. You're as good as what? Only as God wants you to be. Well, I think I'm the one who created all this. You can believe what you want. But you agree that you never know when your time is up. And you understand, and you do believe in God, and God has something to say about how long you walk this planet. That's it. So where are you coming from? God determines your existence, but you're a self-made man, and you tell God that you don't get what he wants, and you don't understand his position. You say, I don't understand it. I submit, fine. Could you give me some insight? That's already being slightly humble. But to say, Rabbi, I can't accept it because I only do things that I understand. So if a person studies Lishma, Torah for the sake of Torah, Zochel Torah Harbe, which are not describable because it's not fathomable, and the whole existence, the whole universe is Kedayulo. It's interesting. Whoever you are, the moment you're no longer here, it's like you never existed. That's it. If the New York Public Library that was given by, I think, Astor, he gave the money for it. Does anybody know, unless you go and you read the plaque, who is Astor? Today, the people, they don't even know who almost like the third world people, they don't know who the president of the United States is, who the Secretary of State is, when they should have known it. And these people, they say, no, it doesn't make sense. Andrew Carnegie, if he wouldn't have given certain things, he'd be forgotten. And they wouldn't have a bust of him wherever he is, they wouldn't even know what he looked like. So when you do exist, who do you think you are? If the moment you no longer here, it's like you never existed. And this person who studies Torah Lishma, God says the whole world is worthwhile just for him, to create it just for him. The Mishnah tells us in Sanhedrin, the law is, and we just had this in this last week's reading, that testimony is always two witnesses, and testimony is only valid and credible if the witnesses are interrogated. They have to be interrogated. And if there's any discrepancy between the testimony of the two witnesses, they're disqualified. But even after they interrogate them, everything seems to be in place, they say to the witnesses, when we speak about a capital crime case where a person's lives can be taken based on the verdict, due to the evidence, which is the testimony, you realize that when God created the world, there was only one person, Adam. What does that say? That every one of us should say, Bishvili Nivra Olam. The world was created for me. What is my value? The whole universe. Proof of the pudding, Adam was the first human being. There was a whole world created for him. So therefore, they should understand the ramifications of taking a human being's life. And therefore, if there's any degree of doubt, regardless that the interrogation, they made it through interrogation, they have to disqualify themselves. That every person should say, Bishvili Nivra Olam. The world was created for me. Who's me? The me means the Jew. Why the Jew? Not because originally it was created for Adam. Adam, when he ate of the tree of knowledge, he was disenfranchised. Who took on that position and that level of value? That was Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people. Atem kriyim odom is based on a verse in Yechezkel. Vehem lo kriyim odom. You've been assumed the position of Odom. Therefore, every Jew, and therefore it says, Kola matzil nevesh achas mi Yisrael. If you save one Jewish life, kilu hitzil olam moleg. It's like you saved the whole world. Because if the whole world is worthwhile for one Jew, so saving that one Jewish life, you've saved the world because the world is worthwhile for that one individual. That is the innate value of a Jew. Ishvili nivra olam. Rameir says, when you study Torah Lishma, kol olam kula kedayhu lo. The whole world is worthwhile for that one person. No, very often, we always have so much whispering in our ears. You've done enough, and if you do it, does it really make a difference? Does society value you? And if you know more Talmud, less Talmud, more mitzvah, one less mitzvah, observe Shabbos, don't observe Shabbos, does it really make a difference? Now the question, who calls the shots? You know, there's a verse in Mishlei, Shlomo Melech, the wisest man who ever lived. You know, a person who graduates from Wharton and disagrees with Warren Buffett. They say, who do you think? Well, I disagree. It's irrelevant what you disagree. You disagree with Shlomo Melech, the wisest man who ever lived. It's irrelevant that you disagree. But I'll tell you what Shlomo Melech says in Mishlei. He says, Kur lebarzel, mitzraf lekesef. If you want to test the purity of iron, what do? You put it through the smelter. Mitzraf lekesef. If you want to determine how much dross is in the silver, you put it through the crucible. And how do you test purity of man? Ish lefi malolo. Each man according to what he praises. That's how you test the purity, you know? Just listen to what people say. Now, the question is, that could be interpreted one of two ways. So Rabbeinu Yonah in his commentary on Mishlei explains, or Proverbs explains, Ish lefi malolo could be explained one of two ways. Each man according to the way he's praised, meaning go out on the street and hear what people say about him. Maybe that's what it means. If you want to know the value of a person, walk on the street and say, by the way, do you know Tom, Dick, and Harry? They say, which one? There are endless Tom, Dicks, and Harry walking the street. No, I'm talking about his Hebrew name, Chaim Yankel. That Tom, Dick, and Harry. Oh, him, he's this, that. The question is the one who you ask, and you take a poll. Who said the positions are valid positions? Who said? Who said they're credible? What the masses say means nothing. So Rabbeinu Yonah says, Ish lefi ma'alolo means each man, you evaluate his purity based on what he praises. Listen to a person's conversation. What's primary, what's secondary? What has no value in his life? If he praises only material, only things which stroke his ego, things which are contrary to spirituality and contrary to God, you know exactly where he stands. And if he praises spiritual values and he extols God, then you understand that tells you his purity. And Rabbi Yehuda goes to say, a person is an observant Jew, meticulously observant. But when you speak to him, all he talks about is material objectives, material values, doesn't talk about spirituality. He says he's an incidental tzaddik, but his essence is not tzaddik. And you have another Jew, it's not that observant, but all he speaks about is godliness and God's honor and God's glory. That person's his core is tzaddik. He's devout. Incidentally, for whatever reason, he didn't have the background, he didn't have the education, wasn't the right environment, whatever it was. Ish lefi malolo. Each person based on what he praises. That's how you determine the purity of a person. Just listen to what his subject matter is. What comes out of his mouth? What does he talk about? What does he praise? What does he extol? What's his objectives? What's it all about? You know, he just came back from shooting elephants, you know, for ivory. You know, he spent $100,000 on that trip to Africa. And he had all kinds of guides. And, you know, and the mud was up to the doors when he went with that Range Rover, special Range Rover built that he should be able to go on the safari. And he came back and he even said Gomel when he got back, because it wasn't so simple, that he survived the trip. And he tells the whole world about it. And he has films and videos. And he had a film crew following him so he could show the whole world when he gets back. You tell me what this guy's all about. You know? Not much to talk about. The world may get excited. They may make a movie of the guy. But what's his value? In God's eyes, he has no value. They're takeaways. If the takeaway is the right takeaway, it's a phenomenal takeaway. But if the takeaway is the wrong takeaway, he's taking you down the wrong road. So Rameir says, a person who studies Torah Lishma, he's zoch l'dvarim harbe. He merits multiple things. How many? Not describable. Not only that, the whole world is worthwhile for him, for this one individual. So is it describable? How special could he be if it's worthwhile to create a whole universe? And God continuously wills the universe for that one individual. That's very interesting. We just read, Moshe Rabbeinu says to Klal Yisrael, Bonim atem l'Shem Elokechem. A Jew, if God forbid somebody dies, and the person is so bereft with pain because of the loss, and he begins lacerating his body, it's a negative commandment. People in ancient days, when they mourned, they would take shards of pottery and they start lacerating, tearing their flesh, because it was like the pain was not containable. So if a Jew does such a thing, he's in violation of a negative commandment. Why? What's the reason? And the Torah says, because you're Am Kodosh, you're a holy people, because you're God's people. So over there's a commentary, Sefarno, who explains, person maybe the reason why he's so beside himself, because he's concerned with the person who died. So the Sefarno says, person that you don't have to worry about that person. Why? Because he's in a better place than you are at this moment. Is the world to come? If you believe in the world to come, it's not a problem. He's in a better place. But you say, what about us? We're abandoned. We're left over. He left us over. He was our security. But don't you realize you're a holy people, you're God's people. You're God's children. The love that God has for us, no human being could ever love his child more than God. So if that's the case, there's no reason to be beside yourselves. Baruch Dainu Emes. Person dies, God is the truthful judge. Where he is, there's not a problem. Where you are, if you have faith in God and you trust him, and Hashem says, you are my children. You're the equivalent of my firstborn. The firstborn is most beloved to his father. So what's there to worry about? So our status to God is you're God's children. And God openly says it. So if that's the case, what are you concerned about? You're abandoned. You're not abandoned. Years ago, I had a conversation with a certain person, not going to mention his name, and very successful man. Then the story goes back over 30 years ago. He has 25,000 employees. He owns 15 companies, maybe even more than that at the time, working 3 shifts a day. So he says to me, and he says, it was a good question. He says to me, does it make sense that Hashem should will this existence for a handful of tzaddikim? How many tzaddikim are in this world? You count them on one hand, maybe on one finger. Is it worthwhile to maintain this existence for a handful of people? So I said, I want to ask you a question. You have 25,000 employees. They work round the clock, 3 shifts a day. You pay fortunes and salaries to these people. And you have other systems making sure that the companies operate properly. What is the value of all these companies? Because yourself, your wife, and you have 3 children to support your family. So it's worthwhile to you because the way you value yourself and your wife and your children, 25,000 people work 3 shifts, plus the support systems that make sure those companies do well. But it's worthwhile for 3 people and the parents. Why? Because they're my children, because it's my wife, because it's me, because I value them. God says, if you understand the value of one tzaddik, the Navi says, tzaddik yisod olam. The tzaddik is the foundation of existence. All existence is worthwhile even for one tzaddik. If you understand that, it's not a problem. But because we don't understand to what degree our innate value is in the eyes of God, you say, it doesn't make sense. So by taking the question and turning it into an answer, it does make sense. Then all of a sudden we see a new value in ourselves. When I do a mitzvah, what's its value? Does it make a difference if I put $1 in the charity box or not in the charity box? Does it make a difference? It makes a difference. Because God says when you do it, it makes a difference. Why? Because it's you. Because you're my child. That's why it makes a difference. Because the value and the ramifications and the consequences of my children are different than anyone else. We find at the time of the Great Flood, God not only destroyed mankind, he destroyed all life. All life that existed on the terrestrial level. So the Midrash asks, if man sinned, why do the animals and all the species, why should they be destroyed? Why? So the Midrash answers it with an allegory. What is it analogous to? A king has an only son, the prince, and he prepares a wedding, which in the history of his kingdom, there was never such a ornate, elaborate wedding. Royalty will be displayed at a level which is never ever seen. He had preparation, everything was prepared, weeks, chefs, bakery, pastry chefs, everything. And they come to the wedding, and the prince dies under the chuppah. And never happens. The king says, take all the food, take everything, just destroy it. So the people say, why be wasteful? If all this food can be fed to the people, to your subjects, why destroy it? He says, you don't understand. The value of my kingdom is only my son. If my subjects, it's only my son. And if my son doesn't live, nothing has value. There I want everything destroyed. Why did God create the species or existence outside of man? It's to accommodate the human being. God says, if I have to destroy mankind, nothing has value. Because I only created all the value to accommodate the human being. But if the human being is no longer here, nothing has value. Destroy everything. Therefore, everything, if man deserved to be destroyed, everything on the terrestrial level perished and destroyed for that reason. because that was the value of mankind. And that we're talking about ordinary people. We're not talking about Atem Kriyim Adam. They were not that special person because Adam already was disenfranchised and the Jewish people yet didn't come into existence yet. But that was the objective. So if we are Bonam Atem L'Shem Elokechem, we are that objective. We are that person. Where God says, even for one individual, the whole world is worthwhile. And that's why saving a Jewish life, one Jewish life, Ki'ilu Hitzel Olam Molei, like you saved a whole world. This is Bishvili Nivra Olam. The world is created for me. You know, in everything in life, the two sides to the equation. Bishvili Nivra Olam. The world, you come, you see this magnificent universe. Avram saw this universe magnificent. And he asked the question, Mi Balabira, who is the master of this universe? I'm so beholden to him because I'm such a beneficiary. I have to dedicate my life to what he provided for me. That's Bishvili Nivra. He created the world for me. I have to reciprocate. The other side of the equation is Bishvili Nivra Olam. The world was created for me. Therefore, I have to take advantage, and I can't stop for a moment, indulge, and become the hedonist, and become the person, the takeover specialist. Because there's so much, and there's not enough years in life to be able to take it all in. Bishvili Nivra Olam. The world was created for me. Some say the two sides to the coin. Either you see it correctly, so we have factually the world was created for me. The question is, how do you interpret that? How do you internalize that? Is it the material? Therefore, indulge endlessly, and that's why when there was the showdown between Esav and Yaakov, and after Yaakov sent this very valuable gift to try to diffuse this situation with his brother who wanted to kill him, he says, why did you send me this gift? He says, to show honor to my master. That's what Yaakov says to Esav. He says, but Yeshli Rov, I have so much. Yaakov says, I will Yeshli Kol. I have it all. Esav says, I'm almost there. Yaakov says, I'm there. I have it all. As little as I have, as much as I have it all. Esav said, I have so much. Yeshli Rav, I have enormous assets. Enormous. But it's Rav, it's much. There's much more. And therefore, Esav was who he was. He was the conqueror. These were the Romans. The Romans were his descendants. They ruled the world supreme. But as much as they were, they never had enough. They were totally consumed with that power. Yaakov is what? Yaakov Ishtam Yoshev Oholim. Yeshli Kol. God, I serve God. Whatever he gives me, it's sufficient. He gives me more, I have it all. As little as I have, as much as I have it all. Because whatever God gives, that's what you're supposed to have. It's a different perspective. Bishvili Nivra Olam. The world was created for me. In what context? To be fully invested in doing God's will. Bishvili Nivra Olam. Esav, he had a whole different script. It's for me. As it says, as the Navi says, the prophet says, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow I shall die. The person speaking about dying. Within the context of the Jew, when you think about the day of death, it's supposed to sensitize you to introspect. But yet a person can be so involved and immersed in the material. He says, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow I shall die, and therefore I better get involved, fully immersed in it, because I may miss something. You know, you may miss that, 16th portion of dessert. You go to that smorgasbord. You've never seen anything. People, you see, they open their eyes, you think they've never eaten before in their lives. That's what's going on. What's going on? Do you eat to live or do you live to eat? Well, what's going on over here? Bishvili Nivra Olam. I remember many years ago, the story goes back maybe 37 years ago. I was asked to lecture in Lincoln Square. And I said a lecture, and I quoted the Mishnah that Matzel Nefesh Achas Misrael Kilu Hitzel Olam Olei. Person saves a Jewish life, it's like he saves the whole world. So I remember there was a woman there. She must have been about 28, 30. That means today she's about 65, maybe a little older. And she says to me, and she was from Nashville, Tennessee. Remember, because I remember her name. I'm not going to mention her name. And she says, Rabbi, I want to ask you a question. Why only kolamatzel nafsh achas mi Yisrael? Saving a Jewish life. What about a non-Jew? I mean, a non-Jew's life doesn't have that value. It's like saving the whole world. Why is it only saving the Jewish life? That's the question she asked me. So I said, if you want to have a private discussion, I'll explain it to you. Now's not the place. Instead, either you get it or you don't get it. Atem kriyim odom, heim lo kriyim odom. Yechezkel Navi says, initially the world was created for an objective. Who has the capacity to address that objective? Only the Jew, because we were given the Torah at Sinai. Because bonam atem l'shem elokechem. It's like you have a problem which has to be resolved, and you have to have a phenomenal, you want to be chairman of the board, so they send out, they're looking for the credentials. Unless you have 25 years of experience, and this experience in this area, and this kind of education, so on and so forth, only then do you qualify for the position. Person says, why? That's considered discrimination. I think I graduated PS 15 and DeWitt High School, and I went to a community college. I think I'm qualified. You can think what you want, but you don't make the bill. You don't fit the bill. That's it. God says, Atem kriyim odom. You're the Odom. You were instated in the place of Odom because he was disenfranchised. Now only you people have the capacity, the ability to meet that objective. Nobody else can. That's what it's about. So therefore, the Jew says, B'shvili nivra olam. For me, the world was created because the objective, that original creation, could only be addressed by the Jew. Through how? Through Torah mitzvahs. There's no other way. I always mention that story many years ago. I used to read the Wednesday New York Times because I had the science section, and I haven't picked up New York Times in 25 years. So there was a famous atheist who came from San Francisco, and they asked him, "What's going to be after you die, and all of a sudden you meet God? What are you going to say to him?" It's going to be a rude awakening. So he says, I'm going to say to him, and it was a wise guy answer, God, why did you let me know that you were here all along? You understand? The answer is, like the story with the flood where it's over the roof and they're throwing you the lifeline. Why don't you tell me I'm here? If you would open your eyes, you would have seen I'm here. You put your head in the sand and you say, why don't I see light? Why can't I breathe? Well, if you submerge under the water, only fish breathe. You can't breathe under the water. That's a fact. What do you mean, why did I tell you I was here? Who do you think was knocking on your door? All the various things. You came out of that crash where you should have been killed, and you came out alive. Why did you come out alive? The answer is because you chose to turn your back. So don't ask me a question, why didn't I tell you? Now it's too late. You should have applied. You didn't apply. Expiration date comes. It's too late. You can't apply any longer. Once the time expires, life is so long. Within that period, you make your choices. As we say, the way you make your bed, that's the way you sleep. Some people, they sleep forever. They will never be resurrected. And I told over the story, there was a person, in Europe, and even today in Israel, the ones who sell the plots in the cemeteries, they're sold by the Chevra Kadisha. It's the group that's responsible for the burial preparation of the person, the deceased. So they sell the plots. And that's the way it was in Europe. So this story goes back to the latter part of the 18th century. And there was a person where the Chevra Kadisha, they charge him 3 times what they charge every other person. 3 times. And he didn't realize it. Of course, he paid. Afterwards, he realized how they actually, they swindled him. He finds out if everybody pays a third and he pays 3 times the price. So he takes him to a din Torah. Who was the chief rabbi? Reb Kiva Eger. Reb Kiva Eger was after the Vilna Gaon, Reb Kiva Eger was the greatest Torah sage. And this person who was the one who made the claim, he was a usurer. He lent money with ribbis, which the Jews not permitted. The Gemara tells us that a person who lends money with ribbis, not once, twice, means his primary profits come from ribbis, and he's involved, and he never repented. Ein afro nina l'tchias ha'mesim. Person will not be resurrected. When he dies, he will never be resurrected. He's going to remain in the dust. So Reb Kiva Eger says, "You're a usurer, aren't you?" He says, "Yes." He says, "You know what? The Talmud says that a person's a usurer, he's not going to be resurrected. So I want to explain to you why you're getting value and they get value. They pay a third because it's only a residency for a short period of time. You, it's a permanent residence. For the permanent residence, you pay 3 times the price. The others, they're creeping out of there. When time's to leave, they're checking out. But there's no checkout time. You're there on a permanent basis. Therefore, you pay 3 times the value." That's what Reb Kiva told this person. You understand? So what's it all about? Atem kriyim adam. Why only hamatzal nefesh achos miYisrael? All of the Jew. Save a Jewish life, it's like saving the whole world. So it just says, because kol ha'olam kedaihu lo. God says the whole world was worthwhile to create for that one individual. Because the objective of that creation could only be addressed by that one person. Nobody else. You have to be my child. You have to be the prince. You have to have the princely status. You have to have the right DNA. You have the right DNA, you're able to make the infusion to give this world all its value. Not, it's like beating a dead horse. You go through the motions. You take a person who's a savant and you train him, teach him how to behave, and he behaves like Einstein. You give him a haircut like Einstein. You give him a pair of glasses like Einstein. He sticks out his tongue like Einstein, like they have on the billboards. And you think it's Einstein. And you realize the man has a 60 IQ. Same thing. They go through the same motions that we go through. They're human, we're human. But the essence of the person is what we call the soul. The Jewish soul is a different dimension of soul. The body only facilitates the soul. So therefore, the end result, it's a different end result. Because we're born him. Why is he your son? Why aren't I your son? Person's not a person's son. He says, you treat your son, so what about me? The answer is, you're not my son. You have a different DNA than I do. We have God's DNA, so to say. The way we created, he gave us a different kind of soul. Therefore, the world is worthwhile for you because only you can meet the objective. They can't meet the objective. A person who studies Torah Lishma, studies Torah for the sake of the Torah, he merits multiple things. The whole world is worthwhile. Because Bereshis bara Elokim, Bishul Torah shenikas Reishis, the Torah was created for one objective. The Torah should be fulfilled because only that gives its value, brings things to perfection. Nothing else brings it to perfection whatsoever. Now, there's a question which is asked by the Rambam at the end of Tractate Makos. There's something we always say, said continuously, and it's the end of Makos. It's a Mishnah. Rotza HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'zakes Yisrael. God wanted to bring merit to the Jewish people. Leficha chirbo lehem Torah mitzvos. Therefore, he gave us an abundance of Torah mitzvos. We have Taryag, 248 positive commandments, 365 negative commandments. But those are the classifications, but there's so many subcategories of those positive and negative commandments. Why did he give us almost like innumerable positive and negative commandments? He wanted to bring us that we should be meritorious. If he would have done us less, something, it's easy to contend with. We have such an array of responsibility, it's never ending. So what's the likelihood to fail? There's a greatly likely to fail if you have a greater level of responsibility. If you have a lesser level of responsibility, there's a less likelihood to fail. So what does it mean? God gave us an abundance of Torah mitzvahs because he wanted that we should be meritorious. Just to the contrary. That gives us a greater chance to fail to a greater degree. That's the question Rambam asks. So Rambam answers, he says something phenomenal. He says, to merit that special place in the world to come, regardless how much you fail in life, if you do one mitzvah once in a lifetime at that perfect level, you merit that special place in the world to come. Understand? You could fail endless times over. It's okay. Sometimes you put good money after good money. You build a business. There's always money lost. But ultimately, if you believe in the product, ultimately you're going to succeed. Lahavdil. You may fail endless over, but with all the chances and all the applications and all the opportunities, if you succeed once in a lifetime, once, God says it was worth it. Therefore, he gives us this array, endless opportunities to be within our purview of choice, that even though we may choose wrongly many times and we succumb to temptation, but if you succeed even once, you've scored big. It's what we call the Grand Slam. You're in, you win the World Series. You're over the top. You come in as a hero. What about all the baggage? God says, I'll deal with the baggage. Don't worry about the baggage. Hopefully you do tshuva before you die. You don't, you'll be purged. But at least after everything's said and done, what do you have? You got that diamond. One of a kind of a diamond. It's worthwhile. You understand? It's something we can't fathom. We can't understand it. The whole world, the universe, the terrestrial, the celestial, the galaxies, the physical, the spiritual world was created for one individual. So what is the innate value of that one individual? It's not to be fathomed. Only God knows the value. But automatically, if we're smart, you raise a child and you give that child self-confidence. And you tell that child, there's nothing that you can't do. And the parent backs that child, encourages the child, and the child believes in himself. Not to become arrogant and pompous. Really believes that if he applies himself, he will succeed. That child has the best chance to draw on his potential to succeed in life. Another child who's told, you're not that smart, you're probably not going to succeed, this, that, and that. Regardless of that child's ability, that child will fail because the person doesn't believe in himself. Was always told, you're a failure. But if you're meant to believe that you're a success and you have what it takes to succeed, all you have to do is apply yourself. That person has a much greater chance to succeed. If he always feels that it's within his ability to succeed. We have to understand who we are. Who are we? We are, our innate value is the whole world in its entirety was worthwhile even for one of us. Why? Because we do certain actions, even one time in a lifetime, the whole world was worthwhile for that one person. Could you imagine? So putting the dollar in the tzedakah box. But look, all my past, I failed endlessly over. As they say, it's not over till it's over. You never know. God's giving you those extra years, those extra hours, those extra minutes. Because in that 1 minute, you don't know what you could accomplish. But it's a minute. What could you accomplish in a minute? As we don't understand how it's worthwhile for one person, God should create a whole world. Because it's unfathomable. So therefore, don't underestimate the value of your value. You study a minute. Torah, a minute. Famous story. There was a person who was proficient in Shas. And it was Rav Moshe Feinstein. And he had a nephew who lived in Eretz Yisrael. His name was Rav Michal Feinstein, who was the son-in-law of the Brisker Rav. And his uncle, Rav Moshe Feinstein was his uncle. And he calls up his nephew and he says to him, I'm finishing Shas at this moment, the whole Talmud, and I wanted to drink l'chaim with you. And my nephew, his only surviving nephew from Europe, and he says, I want to drink l'chaim to celebrate my completion of the Shas. So he says to his uncle, he says, if I would drink l'chaim with every time you finish Shas, I'd be a drunkard. I'd become an alcoholic. That's how often you finish it. He says, you don't understand. This siyum is a different siyum. This siyum is comprised that every free moment I had when I was walking, this and that, this was accumulation of those moments that I had free, and I studied Talmud in those free moments. It's not I sat down and studied. I was walking to take the phone. As I was walking, I had 30 seconds. I reviewed one folio of Talmud. I was something else. It's accumulation of all those moments. That's why the siyum, this completion of Shas, is something unique. But it's a moment, 30 seconds. What's 30 seconds? First thing, everything in life is cumulative. That's firstly. But even if you don't accumulate, it's last moment. Could we even relate and understand the innate value of what a mitzvah is? There's not enough time or capacity in this existence to reward you for one mitzvah. So what is the value of a mitzvah? You put 1 penny in the charity box. The Vilna Gaon on his deathbed was crying. And the Vilna Gaon was the equivalent of an angel. His student said to him, why are you crying? What you accomplish in your life, very few people will ever accomplish. He says, you don't understand. He says, today, for a few kopecks, I buy a 4-cornered woolen garment that is tzitzis. I fulfill mitzvahs. The moment I pass away, it's over. I'm not able to generate that kind of value any longer. I shouldn't cry. It's irrelevant what you have. It's what you could accomplish. What is the value of a kopeck? What's a kopeck? You put it in the charity box, it's a mitzvah. You go do something else with it, you put it in the slot machine, it's irrelevant what it is. It has no value. So again, God gives us opportunities. The opportunities have infinite value. Their value is, they're unfathomable value. The world itself was created. Atem kriyim adam. Kol hamatzil nefesh achs b'Yisrael. You save one Jewish life, it's like saving the whole world. Because only the Jew is able to address the objective through the fulfillment of mitzvahs, even one mitzvah. It's worthwhile that this whole existence does exist. To be continued. Everybody have a good day. We have Daf Yomi at 11 o'clock.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi. See you later, 11 o'clock.
Shkoyach, Rabbi.
Take care.
See you later, Rabbi.